Hi everyone, welcome back to another video. My name is Simon. I talk about music, as my YouTube channel name would imply. And I'm back with another mini album reviews video. Today I'm talking about 10 albums in short form reviews. It's hard to believe that we're almost halfway through this year. That's absolutely wild. But anyway, yeah, I do have quite a few videos planned for this channel, hopefully soon. Hopefully this month, but I mean, we'll see if I can get around to doing that. But anyway, for now, these reviews I'm keeping brief, and yeah, let's get right into the reviews. Of course, as always, just my personal opinion on these albums. I'm not meaning to, be objective or anything like that. Music is subjective at the end of the day, so yeah, feel free to disagree with me on any of these albums. But with all that being said, let's get right into the reviews, starting with... So I was considering doing the full Modest Mouse discography dive to prepare for this review, but they've got lots of albums, some of which are really, really long, and I also just haven't liked a lot of their songs that I've heard over the years, and thus I just kind of had a feeling this band wasn't really for me. But I know this is probably a highly anticipated album for quite a few people, so I thought maybe some people might be curious what I think of it. And yeah, I think I'm just more and more realizing this band probably just isn't for me. And maybe sometime I'll check out some of their classic albums, but my main issue with this album is that it's messy. A lot of the production can sound a little bit demo-like, where all the different fragments clash in a weird way, like how Can't Talk Right Now sounds kinda like something that could have been on that 2022 Interpol album, not a compliment. Or there's the obnoxiously in-your-face production of Rotten Fruit, a song that also has awful percussion. And while I do think that there's a lot of cringy moments here, I do like the chorus of the opening track with the line, "They'll go crazy if you don't go crazy somehow." Also one of the catchier moments here. And I like some of the grooves on songs like Absolutely Necessary Never and Third Side of the Moon. But then you get the really underwritten and kinda insufferable Life's a Dream. And look, I understand how interesting it can be to really think about how dreams make perfect sense when they're happening, but then you wake up and realize how crazy they were. But to take that and start an existential theory about how life's apparently actually all a dream, just like our dreams are, it just feels really nihilistic in a way that really bothers me. And yeah, I know it's probably not meant that seriously, I'm overthinking it, I know. But when the song feels so underwritten, there's nothing else really here to make it better or add more context. It's just kind of a mess. And then going back to what I was saying earlier about this album being messy, it wasn't just the production that I was talking about. I'm also talking about Isaac Brock's vocals. And it's hard to fully explain, but something about his oddly aggressive vocal delivery just doesn't really fit with this instrumentation a lot of the time. So overall, as an album, while I can appreciate some of the emotional moments like Third Side of the Moon, and I can tell there's some creativity on this album, it's just not for me, and I probably won't be going back to any of these songs much. So 5 out of 10, and while it's far from the worst album I've heard, I just get the feeling this band probably isn't for me. But let me know if I should check out some of their classics, because apparently they're really good. So the funny thing with Iceage is that while I remember listening to 2021's Seek Shelter quite a bit when it came out, around the time that 16-year-old me was discovering my music taste, I've actually mostly forgotten about this band's existence, and it wasn't until I researched them a bit to prepare for this review when I realized just how critically acclaimed this band has been. You could argue that in some circles, they're kinda legendary. But anyway, for those of you who don't know, Iceage are a Danish post-punk band who started gaining a lot of traction in 2011 for their debut album New Brigade, and continued to get a lot of acclaim for at least the next few years. And I'm glad that I finally took the time to listen to all their albums multiple times each, because I'm starting to really like this band a lot. Although, after listening to all those other albums, I gotta say, Seek Shelter really does pale in comparison, even though Vendetta is a pretty damn great song. But one thing that I do really respect about this band is that they've been changing their sound quite a bit, keeping some unpredictability in the anticipation for what to expect whenever they release a new album, so I had good reason to believe that this new album would at the very least be interesting. And honestly, I'm kinda shocked to say that's not particularly the case. Now, I'll say right off the bat that this album is better than Seek Shelter, but it kinda feels like the band is losing their sense of musical identity and making a more standard post-punk album, which is a sound that I like quite a bit, but it doesn't make this album any more interesting to talk about, even if I do mostly like it. And there are moments that I like quite a bit. like Salve for Every Sore, which is one of the few moments here that really feels noteworthy beyond just being the best version of this sound, with a fancy kind of post-punk with mixing that on paper might be considered really bad, but it actually works really well on this track and it really shows what this band is capable of when they try more creative things. And the following track, Mother of Pearl, has some of the better music on this album too, although I'm not a huge fan of the lyrical framing, because while I'm pretty sure this song is satire from the perspective of anti-abortion right-wingers, it doesn't really do a great job of satire and thus almost comes across as being a little bit serious, even if I'm pretty sure it wasn't intended that way. At least I certainly hope it wasn't. But going back toward positivity, Star has an interesting, almost disco-like groove hidden behind all the post-punk chaos, and I think it's a pretty effective song. I also think the following Lifetime is kind of a highlight for its bouncy groove that sounds like classic post-punk and leads to arguably one of the catchiest songs here, and then the penultimate track, Holy Water, has some really good melodic lead guitar. And that's before the closing track goes apocalyptic mode and has the perfect balance of dramatic while also trying to stay calm and go out with a bang. Honestly, the final leg of the record is easily the best part, and I'm glad to hear this band still doing some cool things here. But all this being said, while I do like a lot of the moments here, and I think the album's pretty good overall, I've heard better post-punk this year, but I've also heard worse. I don't know, it's just not hitting the way that I feel like it should. I often like Iceage most when they're making grimier, rougher sounding post-punk with a bit more energy to it, and I feel like they've kind of lost that on these two most recent albums of theirs. And while I like this one as a whole more than Seek Shelter, I'm not sure there's a standout track here on the level of Vendetta, and the album also just feels like arguably their least interesting. And while there are some interesting lyrics at points on this album, it doesn't feel like it really adds up to more than the sum of its parts. And I can't say I'm really all that emotionally invested in it, nor is it the kind of album that I find particularly fun to analyze. And I also kind of feel like this review might be coming across as more negative than it is. To be clear, I do think this is pretty good, and I'll give it a 7 out of 10, but I was really hoping I'd like it more, and unfortunately there's just too much going against this, whether it be little nitpicks I have, or just the overall lack of stronger hooks, and the pure energy and rawness of their sound that originally won me over on this band. That overall, as a result, I'm left feeling underwhelmed. This is the fourth studio album from Pure Wrath, an Indonesian black metal project from Januario Hardy. I hope I pronounced that correctly, my apologies if I didn't. This being his first album under this name since 2022's Hymn to the Woeful Hearts. Now, Pure Wrath's albums usually focus a lot on generational trauma and feature some heartbreaking, devastating lyrics and music that really amplifies that sadness, and that 2022 album was really strong. Now, did it deserve to be on my top albums list on my blog that year? No, probably not. I overhyped quite a few of those albums at the time, but it's still really solid, and after listening to the first two Pure Wrath albums, it had me even more excited about this new one. Although I also knew it was likely going to be a difficult listen, as Pure Wrath albums typically are. And I mean, with an album title like Bleak Days Ahead, that definitely implies, yeah, it's not going to be a fun, happy, joyful listen. But I am very happy with how this turned out, for a few different reasons. It's both a very emotional, hard-hitting album with such heartbreaking lyrics once again, although this time it's more focused on the future, as the title might imply. And there's a lot of sadness about modern life and the ways that life can be really harsh sometimes, and especially with that feeling of there being no way out of those struggles, it's definitely a bleak listen. And yet the music is pretty kick-ass, beyond just fitting the vibe super well, where it's actually quite impressive and can lead to a pretty enjoyable album, even if I'm not in the mood for purely depressing, sad music. And with the constant variety and changes in sound throughout the album, all while feeling like part of a larger whole, and the somewhat more straightforward while simultaneously experimental approach to black metal, it leads to a pretty damn great album if you ask me. I wouldn't say it's his best album, but it's probably his most ambitious. So for me, it's an 8 out of 10, and I expect that I'll be listening to this a lot in 2026. And if you like black metal, I would highly recommend this one. I remember really liking Gia Margaret's 2023 album Romantic Piano. And then more recently, I started hearing Hinoki Wood in random videos, and it seemed to go semi-viral in certain circles. And it was pretty cool to see that as someone who thought that I was in an extremely small percentage of people who knew that album existed. I guess maybe not, I don't know. And I recently found out that she released an album this year, back in April, which I guess wasn't that long ago. But anyway, I'm just getting to this now. And man, I really wish I liked this more. And I thought we could have been in for a really good album considering the opening track is legitimately great, not only with its relatable lyrics about feeling like the only person who's got problems, but also with its really good interpolation of Hinoki Wood. At least that's how I heard it. I think it was an interpolation. It sounds quite similar. And yeah, that song is really great, and it had me excited about the rest of the album. And unfortunately, it's just not really hitting for me. It just often feels like this is some pretty generic indie folk or indie folk pop or bedroom pop or whatever you want to call this kind of music. Whatever it is, it often just feels pretty bland, and I'm not really a huge fan of the production, which doesn't let it have the atmosphere that Romantic Piano did. Even if there are some moments that I like, including some of the livelier moments on the track list, such as the really catchy Good Friend. But overall, as an album, I just don't really have that much to say about this one. It's got the occasional moment that bumps this up to a 6 out of 10, but I really thought I would like this a lot more than I do. I've reviewed Sadness a few times in my music reviewing journey. In fact, I talked about a Sadness album in the first ever video on this YouTube channel, which was one of these mini review videos. And while I didn't really like that album a whole lot, I decided I may as well check out this new one. Now, apparently these are re-recorded versions of songs from over a decade ago, and I'm not sure if they were ever previously released or not. And I typically don't review, like, remix albums and stuff like that, but I don't know if these were released or not. Either way, I'm pretty sure they're all new to me. I wasn't listening to Sadness at that time. I did not know that very much music even existed back then. I was, like, probably 10 or 11. But anyway, I actually ended up liking this album a lot. Something about the combination of instruments altogether makes for a uniquely heartbreaking and emotional listen that blends shoegaze with black metal and dream pop, and while I've heard quite a few artists try and pull off something like this, I'm not sure many are able to pull it off quite this well. And I think it's largely about finding the right places to put the devastating melodies and also knowing when to build the tension and when to hold back. And also, it just hits in a way that I can't fully describe. Just listen to it and you'll probably understand. But I also think the writing is really striking on an album like this. Not the most amazing poetry ever, all things considered it's actually quite simple, I would say. But the album perfectly captures the feeling portrayed in the lyrics of something or someone slipping away. And the slow progress of it is devastating and bleak, and yet also so beautiful in the way it's written. And I find it kind of fascinating how the album ends with the line, "I know you love me, I know you do." It almost feels like maybe even a lie told to the self to try and cope through this loss. Or maybe there is some truth to it. It's open to interpretation. Maybe there's something deeper than what appears on the surface. And yeah, I guess, like I said, leave it open to interpretation while keeping the blatantly obvious emotions. And you start to realize that this artist is very appropriately named, at least on this album, that is. So yeah, it's an absolutely excellent record that I didn't see coming at all. And while the mixing could be a bit better in certain spots, and I wish the vocals maybe had a bit more variety, even though the screams are quite powerful. Look, I'm nitpicking. Those really are not big issues for me, and thus it's an 8 out of 10 and one that I cannot recommend enough to fans of anything shoegaze or black metal like. What a surprise. I don't think there's any debate over who the most famous member of One Direction is at this point. It's obviously Harry Styles, and he's probably the most critically acclaimed as well. And as someone who's not a Harry Styles fan at all, I'd argue Niall Horan is easily a better artist, and I really wish he'd get more attention as a result. Now, obviously, he's still got his fan base, and I'm not saying that we need to make big-name celebrities more popular and put them on more of a pedestal or anything like that. But if Niall had instead gotten the amount of acclaim that Harry did, that would have made so much more sense to me. And that's part of the reason that I make that comparison. And the other part of that reason is that they make similar kinds of music, and thus it's odd to me that Harry has gotten so much more attention. But whatever, it's not a competition, and I've never fully loved a Niall Horan album. I finally dove into his discography to prepare for this review, and while Heartbreak Weather was probably my favorite album of his and had some fantastic moments, as a whole, even that album felt pretty inconsistent and didn't quite land as much as I would have liked. But 2023's The Show was only a slight step down, and I was optimistic that this would at least be good. And wow, this might be his best album to date. Now, I will immediately follow that by saying I'm still waiting for the Niall Horan album to fully click for me, because while I think this is very good, I don't think I can honestly call it great, which is kind of a shame, especially considering that there are moments that come so close. I'll point to Little More Time, which has a strong hook, or at least what could have been, but the production is too messy on that track for my liking. And Boys Are Fun is also a frustrating one because while I think it's still a very good song, it should be great and I can't even figure out what went wrong. I like the hook, and I like the theme of Niall talking about how difficult men can be in relationships and having fun with it in a song from a man's perspective. And I just don't think he owns the melodramatic vibe quite enough. But the frustrating thing is I can't point to any specific place where the song goes wrong. Something just feels a little off and preventing me from loving that song, even though I do still like it. But there's also the great melodic opener Tastes So Good, the silly horniness of Monochromatic that feels destined to be an earworm, and I also really like the subtle frustration in trying to help someone, most likely a partner, realize their full potential on Flowers, which feels intentionally lacking in more melody to highlight that there's greater heights that could be reached, while still sounding pleasant enough for me to call it a great song. And She Gets It From Her Mother is a glorious song that feels like Niall playing to all his strengths as an artist, and his vocals are fantastic on that song. And honestly, I really like Niall's vocals throughout most of this album, and just in general, he's a really good singer. And in this album's most glorious moments, it helps these tracks shine even more. And when there's so much good writing, including some cleverness that a lot of people are unfortunately going to look past, it leads to a really damn good album. And about the lyrics, prime example of a clever moment that I really like is on the penultimate track, Die If I Don't, where he takes the cliche of, oh, I'm gonna die without you in songs, that's one of my least favorite cliches in music, and recognizes that he'll die either way, because that's how life works. It eventually ends. But before this gets too dark, too quickly, I'll just say once again, this is a really good album from Niall. Again, probably my favorite of his albums thus far. And honestly, I wasn't really expecting to say that, but I'm glad that I can. Strong 7 out of 10, and I'd absolutely recommend giving this a chance. And to quote one of my favorite YouTubers, John from ARTV and Beyond ARTV, when he was discussing Magdalena Bay in 2021, even though that's a band that I'm not a huge fan of, pop does not need to be a dirty word. And to me, this Niall Horan album is absolutely an example of that. Part of me is wondering why I'm even reviewing this album. I mean, how many people really care about a new Evanescence album in 2026? Or even cared about Evanescence in the first place? Now, to their credit, I'll go on the record saying that their debut album is better than most people will probably give it credit for. But that was over 20 years ago, and in that time, they've done pretty much nothing even the slightest bit interesting with their music, even if I won't claim to hate them as much as a lot of critics. Although that 2021 album was rough. And honestly, I was kind of expecting this might be even worse or just as bad until I saw that the ratings seemed a bit better and curiosity got the best of me and I decided to give it a few listens because I figured it would probably be pretty easy to review. And I'll admit this is better than The Bitter Truth from 2021, in large part because the mixing doesn't sound like total shit in the same way, although the production does still have some rough edges that keep the best melodies on this album from really popping off more. And honestly, I feel like it bothers me more than it usually would on most albums. And that's not to say that it isn't noticeable. I mean, look at some of the weird effects on the guitar distortion that does not flatter this album at all. But come on, it's nu metal, or at least that's the style of music Evanescence are usually known for, and this is kind of in that vein. And it's kind of supposed to sound like that a bit, right? Like it's supposed to sound maybe a little bit messy. Well, so much of this album seems to be aiming for huge anthemic hooks, and I think there are some sort of catchy moments, but especially when paired with the more symphonic elements, I just find it harder to look past the messy production. And the bigger issue, in my opinion, is that the songwriting feels really bland and basic without really doing much to stand out. Who Will You Follow was an obvious single for its stronger melodies and vocals from Amy Lee, and while I would not put it among Evanescence's best, aka the best songs from their first album, it is a good song, I'll give it that. As for the rest of the album, I just can't say there's really much to like. I guess the closing track is an attempt for a powerful ending, and I don't think it completely falls flat on its face, and kind of works as a closer, but I'm struggling to find positive things to say other than that. The melodies are generally pretty pleasant, even if not earwormy or anything. Now, going back to talking about Amy Lee's vocals, well, typically that's been one of Evanescence's greatest strengths, where on the album before this one, my biggest issue was that her vocals couldn't shine through enough because of the production. But while I think that Amy Lee is generally a good singer, I wouldn't even say she always helps this album consistently, because there are moments like How Do I Heal and About Us, those two show up back to back in the track list, although there are other examples as well, where I just find her vocals to be a bit much, and honestly I feel like she maybe oversins a bit. And it's not a huge problem, but when the songwriting is so bland and the instrumentation and production don't leave much of an impact, yeah, I think it's slightly better than The Bitter Truth, but that's really not saying much at all. And when it comes to giving this album a rating, well, it's albums like this one that make me kind of miss my old rating system a bit. Not really, just a tiny bit. I'm much happier with my current rating system, I'll just make that very clear. But giving this album a 5 out of 10 feels generous, but a 4 out of 10 feels a bit too harsh, to be honest. And thus, I kind of want to give this an honorary 4.5 out of 10. But it's not really that big a deal. The album's not any good. And I do want to stick to my rules where I rate albums out of 10 with the full point system. So I guess if I had to pick, yeah, I guess there's enough decent melodies and moments that should go pretty hard, even if they don't, that on potential, I'll be generous with about the lightest 5 out of 10 you can imagine. But I put the word potential in quotes because I have no reason to believe that the next Evanescence album is going to be any good either. Whenever it comes out, or like whether it's soon or we wait another 5 years, I don't know, it honestly doesn't really matter that much to me. Of Montreal are a band that I've heard of a lot over the years but never actually listened to until now. And this is my first time listening to an album of theirs. And it's good, but I don't think I'll be going back to it much, and I'm not going to be rushing out of my way to check out their other albums. And look, I'll definitely say that there's some interesting writing on this album, such as how Hack It Up shows the narrator wanting to know what it's like to be someone else, and recognizing that the only way to know is to actually be that person, which obviously isn't possible, but it still makes for a compelling song from a lyrical standpoint. And there's also a lot of really interesting individual lines all across this album, some sort of alterations of cliches to make it a little bit more interesting. But I wish the music itself stuck with me more. And I can respect the amount of variety on this album, with some of the more intentionally awkward sounding songs making up a large portion of the track list, but also having a pummeling rocker like When, and the desperate horniness of that song toward one specific person doesn't really bother me, because I'm pretty sure that it's meant satirically. I mean, it's punk. It's not supposed to be a sexy song. But I just wish a lot of the melodies could stand out to me a bit more, and often these songs feel like cool experiments that could have been so much more if maybe for a little bit of polishing up, because the production can also get kind of messy at points, and it doesn't always work. So for the things this does well, I will give it a light 7 out of 10, but it's just not hitting as hard as I feel like it should, but I would still say it's worth hearing. This is my first time listening to an album by Elder, a German prog rock / metal band who've gotten quite a bit of critical acclaim. They've been active for about 2 decades now, and this album is one of a handful that's gotten a lot of acclaim. And the first thing I noticed immediately about this project is that it's quite impressive musically and feels very carefully crafted. I definitely admire the drum work on this album, and the music all feels like it comes together to create more than the sum of its parts. And I'm mainly talking about the individual layers within each track, not the album's sequencing. Although I guess the album does take you on a bit of an interesting journey, which I can praise for being quite grand and actually living up to what it's aiming for, at least a little bit. But then that brings me to discussing the production, and I just wish this hit a little harder. And it's especially an issue with the drums, which have some really good playing, but just don't hit as hard in the final product as I would have liked. Whether it be the stiffness of the snares on the opening track, or the way the snare is drowned out on the following capture release, or just so many moments where the kit just sounds a little bit oddly mic'd, and it's kind of hard to explain. And the mixing can be questionable too, with the song like the title track being an example of the vocals getting buried. Now, I do mostly like the lyrics on this album too, which seem to be following the story of someone going through time and struggling with how quickly everything is changing, and wanting to go back to the past. I mean, if you watch my channel, you know those are themes that resonate with me a lot, and I think it's got the right kind of instrumentation to really embrace that journey and make it feel real, but also a bit dramatic in a way that feels opera-like, but doesn't sacrifice the emotional core of the album. And now insert my usual statement on how this is all just my interpretation of the album. There's likely a lot more going on. But taking into account my production complaints, and that I don't think this fully goes into any super unique territory musically that really stands out to me in a huge way, despite doing a lot of things really well, okay, I'll admit it's a good album, but I don't think it's great, although I can see how some people might be able to look past my nitpicks. If you can, this is probably worth a shot. For me, it's a 7 out of 10 because it's a pretty fun and also emotionally intense listen. I just don't expect it to really stick with me that much. I'll probably return to it at some point, but likely not particularly soon. Here's the second solo album by Ed O'Brien, best known as a member of the legendary experimental rock band Radiohead. And I skipped over his debut to go right into this one, and honestly, I was surprised how much I ended up liking this. It's a very eerie, haunting album that seems to focus on spirituality and the questions within it, including the changing mindsets of human beings as we age. Although, as usual, I could be totally wrong, but those are definitely some themes that I have personally found in this album, whether intentional or not. And again, the music's pretty haunting, often sounding like a lot like Radiohead, but also often doing things that are completely different. And it makes for a pretty interesting experimental album. Now, toward the end of the record, it loses a bit of its magic. The closing track feels a bit unnecessary, at least parts of it do, considering it's a nearly 10-minute runtime. And the ambient pieces that lead into it really would have felt more justified had the closing track felt more connected to them. But whatever, this is still a really solid album, a strong 7 out of 10 for me, and the first 4 tracks are all very intriguing, and I'd absolutely recommend giving this a chance. Alright everyone, thank you so much for watching this video. As always, it's just my personal opinion on these albums. And also, I'm aware some of these reviews were a little bit more in-depth. Some of them were very, very brief. But, I mean, they were all fairly brief. I mean, it's a mini reviews video, that's the point. But, yeah, I was trying to put a little bit more effort into all of these. And then I eventually just ran out of time. And I wanted to get this all out anyway. But the day that I was supposed to work on some of these reviews, something else came up. So, yeah, it is what it is. Yeah, so I've been quite busy in real life with a lot of stuff. At some point soon, I might explain a little bit more about what's been going on. But don't worry, everything's fine. It's nothing bad. Just busy times, that's all. But yeah, anyway, thank you so much for watching. And yeah, I'm planning some more videos, hopefully some individual album reviews soon. I have a throwback review that I've been working on that I'm going to try and get published pretty soon. And then another one that I want to do, hopefully later this month. I may not get this all done, at the right time that I'm planning, within this month. But I don't know. We'll see when I finish all these videos. But anyway, thank you for watching. I think that's all I got to say for now. And yeah, have an awesome day, everyone.